The mailman would never forget the afternoon when the boy handed him a letter with no addressee and said with eyes full of tears, "Please, find her, even though I don't know where she is." If this story has already touched your heart in the first few seconds, I invite you to subscribe. But stay, because the most important part is about to be revealed. The village of San Miguel del Valle had always been a place where time seemed to move more slowly. Adobe houses lined narrow stone streets, and red tile roofs gleamed under the afternoon sun like dormant embers. The air smelled of freshly baked bread and wet earth when it rained, and the sound of church bells marked the hours with a precision no one questioned. In that corner of the world, every face was known, every story shared, and every secret, sooner or later, came to light. The village had stood for over 300 years, its plaza fountain carved from volcanic stone, still flowing as it had for generations. Children played around it in the afternoons, their laughter echoing off the surrounding colonial buildings with their thick walls and wooden balconies adorned with flowering plants. Mornings in San Miguel always began the same way. Don Ramiro's rooster crowed before dawn, waking the roosters from neighboring houses in a chaotic symphony that spread throughout the town. Then came the first sounds of daily life. Wooden doors opening with familiar creaks, the sound of water falling into stone basins, the voices of women calling their children for breakfast, the aroma of coffee slipping through open windows, the smell of burning wood from kitchen stoves mixed with the scent of jasmine and bougainvillea that climbed the walls. Don Emilio had been San Miguel's mailman for 43 years. His hands, weathered by the sun and wrinkled like old paper, had touched thousands of letters. He knew every neighbor's handwriting, knew who was waiting for news from the city, who received remittances from abroad, who kept love letters in secret drawers. He could tell just by the weight and feel of an envelope whether it contained good news or bad. He walked every day with his worn leather bag hanging from his shoulder, greeting with a gentle smile, stopping to chat in doorways, being a silent witness to the joys and sorrows of that community. The bag itself was a relic, given to him on his first day by the previous mailman, its leather cracked and soft from decades of use. His routine was sacred. He left his house at 7 in the morning, when the sun was just beginning to warm the stones of the path. First he would stop by Doña Lucia's bakery, where she always saved him a sweet bread, fresh from the oven. The bakery had been in her family for 4 generations, its enormous clay oven still producing the best bread in the region. "You're too thin, Don Emilio," she would scold gently. "A man your age needs to eat more." Then he would walk down the main street, greeting Don Marcos, who swept the entrance to his store, the Perez sisters who watered their flowers, twins in their 70s who dressed identically and finished each other's sentences. "Good morning, Don Emilio," they would call in unison. "Good morning, lovely ladies. Your flowers are more beautiful every day." Finally, Father Agustin, heading to the church for morning mass, always walking with his worn breviary. The priest had baptized half the town and buried the other half, carrying their stories like crosses on his shoulders. Every step, every greeting, every face was part of a ritual that gave meaning to Don Emilio's days. This wasn't just a job, it was his life's mission. But in recent months, Don Emilio had noticed something unusual. Every day, as he passed in front of the Vargas family's house, a boy waited for him sitting on the front step. His name was Mateo. He would be about 9 years old, maybe 10. He had dark, disheveled hair, large dark eyes like deep wells, and a gaze that seemed to search for something beyond the horizon. He always wore the same faded blue shirt and shorts with a patch on the knee. His bare feet swung while he waited, and in his hands he always held a white envelope, pristine and carefully guarded. The first time Don Emilio stopped in front of him, Mateo looked up shyly. His eyes reflected a mixture of hope and melancholy that reminded him of stray dogs waiting on corners, longing for a gesture of kindness. "Good morning, Don Emilio," he said in a soft voice, almost a whisper. "Good morning, boy. Are you waiting for a letter?" Mateo shook his head, but his eyes said otherwise. There was something in his expression, something he couldn't completely hide, a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. I just wanted to see you pass by." Don Emilio smiled, ruffled the little one's hair affectionately, and continued on his way. But the next day, Mateo was there again, and the next day too, and so on for weeks. Every morning the boy appeared in the same place, at the same time, with the same white envelope in his hands. He never said anything more, just watched the mailman pass, as if his mere presence was enough consolation. Don Emilio began to wonder what story was hidden behind those sad eyes. He knew the Vargas family well. He knew the boy lived with his grandmother, Doña Carmen, a woman with a severe face but a soft heart, though she never showed it. The house was modest, with whitewashed walls and a small garden where geraniums and mint grew. Through the window, Don Emilio could sometimes see Doña Carmen moving in the kitchen, preparing tortillas or washing dishes, always busy, always silent, her face set in resignation. Don Emilio had known Doña Carmen since she was young and vibrant. She'd raised her daughter Isabel alone after her husband died in an accident. The whole town had watched Isabel grow into a beautiful young woman with an artist's soul, but she'd fallen in love with the wrong man, a charming stranger who disappeared when she became pregnant. 5 years ago, Isabel herself had vanished. One October afternoon, when the leaves were beginning to fall and the wind brought the smell of the first rains, Mateo stood up when he saw the mailman approaching. This time, instead of remaining silent, he extended his hand and gave him the white envelope. His fingers trembled slightly, as if what he was doing required all his courage. "Don Emilio, can you deliver this?" The mailman took the envelope carefully. It had no address, it had no name, it was only sealed with adhesive tape and had a small ink stain in one corner, as if someone had cried over it. The paper was slightly wrinkled, as if it had been taken out and put away many times, folded and unfolded with nervous hands. "Son, this has no addressee. Who do you want to send it to?" Mateo lowered his gaze. His lips trembled before answering. Don Emilio saw how the boy clenched his fists, how he contained the tears that threatened to overflow. "To my mom." Don Emilio felt a lump in his throat. He knew the Vargas family. He knew the boy lived with his grandmother. He knew that Mateo's mother, a young woman named Isabel, had left years ago without a trace. No one talked about her. It was as if her name was forbidden in that house. The few times someone mentioned her in town, conversations became whispers, looks of compassion mixed with judgment. "And where is your mom, Mateo?" The boy raised his eyes, and in them was a mixture of hope and pain so deep that Don Emilio had to look away for a moment. It was the look of someone who has been disappointed so many times, but hasn't quite given up hoping. "I don't know. That's why I need you to find her. You know all the houses. You know where people live. You deliver letters to everyone. Please, Don Emilio, find my mom. You're the only one who can help me." The mailman looked at the envelope in his hands. He felt the weight of that request, so simple and yet so impossible. It was just a white envelope, but it contained the entire universe of a boy who longed for his mother. When he looked at Mateo again, when he saw those contained tears, those trembling lips, that desperate hope, he knew he couldn't say no. "Give me a few days, Mateo. I'll try." The boy's face lit up as if they had just lit a candle in the darkness. A shy smile appeared on his lips. "Really? Will you really do it?" "Really, I promise you." Mateo gave a little jump and hugged the mailman tightly. Don Emilio felt the thin little arms surrounding his waist, felt the boy's heart beating fast against his chest. When Mateo separated, he had tears in his eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Thank you, Don Emilio. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And if you too have ever waited for a letter that changed your life, tell me about it in the comments." That night, Don Emilio returned to his small house at the end of town. He had lived alone since his wife, Magdalena, had passed away 5 years ago. The house smelled of coffee and old newspapers, of wood and memories. The walls were decorated with faded photographs, their wedding, their children when they were small, Magdalena smiling in the garden. Every object in that house had a story, a memory attached like invisible dust. He sat in his wooden chair by the window, the same one where he sat every night to read or simply to look at the stars. The chair had been his father's and his grandfather's before that. He lit an oil lamp that cast soft shadows on the walls and carefully opened the envelope Mateo had given him. Inside was a sheet of lined paper torn from a school notebook. The handwriting was clumsy, childish, with irregular strokes and some misspelled words, but every word was written with infinite care. Don Emilio could see where the boy had pressed too hard with his pencil, where he'd erased and rewritten, where a tear had fallen and smudged the ink. He began to read, and with each line he felt his heart break a little more. "Dear Mom, I don't know if you're going to read this. I don't know if Don Emilio is going to find you, but I need to tell you that I miss you every day. Grandma says you left because you didn't love us, but I don't believe it. I think something happened. I think you love me. When I wake up, I still remember your voice singing. You sang that song about the moon and the stars. I sing it sometimes when I can't sleep. When it rains, I remember when you hugged me and told me not to be afraid of thunder, that it was just the sky playing bowling. I keep your photo under my pillow. I look at it every night before I sleep. It's a little torn at the corners because I look at it so much. At school, everyone has mums who pick them up. I stay with Grandma, and she's good to me, but it's not the same. She never hugs me like you did. She never tells me she loves me. Sometimes the kids ask me where my mom is, and I don't know what to say. I say you're working far away, but I think they know it's not true. Mom, I need to ask you something. Did I do something wrong? Is that why you left? I promise if you come back, I'll be good. I'll never cry at night. I'll help Grandma more. I'll be the best son ever. There's so much I want to tell you. I'm in 4th grade now, and I got a good grade on my math test. I wanted to show you so badly. I still remember the sound of your laugh. Sometimes I'm afraid I'm forgetting, and that scares me more than anything. If you read this, please come back, or at least write to me. I need to know you're okay. I need to know you think about me. I need to know you didn't forget about me. I pray for you every night. I ask God to keep you safe and to bring you back to me. Grandma tells me to stop hoping, but I can't. Hope is all I have. I love you, Mom. I love you very, very, very much. More than all the stars in the sky. Your son who misses you every day. Mateo P.S. I still sleep with the stuffed bear you made me. His name is Oso. His ear is falling off, but I'll keep him forever. Don Emilio closed his eyes. Tears flowed freely down his weathered cheeks. This wasn't just a letter. This was a child's soul laid bare. He folded the letter reverently and kept it in the pocket of his shirt, right over his heart. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stayed awake thinking about that boy who waited every day, about that missing mother, about all the broken stories he had seen in his life as a mailman. He thought about his own wife, Magdalena, how much he still missed her. He understood the ache of absence, the way it settled into your bones and never quite left. But at least he'd had the chance to say goodbye. Mateo had no such closure. "Help me, mi amor," he whispered to the darkness, to her spirit. "Help me find this boy's mother." As if in answer, a gentle breeze came through the window, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine, Magdalena's favorite flower. The next morning, he began his search. First, he went to Doña Carmen's house. The old woman received him at the door with a suspicious expression. She wore an apron stained with flour, and her hands were damp. "Don Emilio, what brings you here? I've come to ask you about Isabel." Doña Carmen's face hardened immediately. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes turned cold. "That woman doesn't exist to me. She left and abandoned us. I don't want to hear her name in this house again. Doña Carmen, the boy misses her. He has a right to know where his mother is. That boy is better off without her," the old woman replied curtly. "Isabel was irresponsible. She fell in love with a man who only brought her problems, a stranger who filled her head with impossible dreams. When he left, she disappeared too. She left no address, no letter, nothing. But he's suffering, Doña Carmen. A boy needs his mother." The old woman looked away. For a moment her expression softened, and Don Emilio could see the pain hidden behind the hardness. "Do you think I don't suffer too?" she said quietly. "That girl is my daughter. I raised her alone after her father died. I gave her everything I could, and she repaid me by leaving without saying goodbye, leaving me her son to raise in my old age." Don Emilio nodded with understanding. There was pain on both sides of this story. Maybe she had her reasons. Maybe she's suffering too. Doña Carmen was silent for a long moment. Finally, with a weary sigh, she spoke. Years ago, before she left, she mentioned something about a town in the mountains. San Rafael de las Flores, I think. She said a distant aunt lived there, a sister of my late husband, but I'm not sure. And frankly, I'd rather not know. Do you have any other information? The aunt was called Soledad, but that was many years ago. I don't know if she's still alive. I don't know if Isabel really went there. Don Emilio nodded and said goodbye. As he walked back through the cobblestone streets, he felt a mixture of sadness and determination. San Rafael de las Flores was 2 days' journey away, in the northern mountains. It wasn't easy to get there, but it wasn't impossible either. During the following days, Don Emilio made more inquiries. He spoke with old neighbors who remembered Isabel. Doña Marta, the seamstress, recalled that Isabel used to buy colorful fabrics from her. She was a cheerful girl, Doña Marta said while sewing. Always singing, always dreaming. She bought fabric scraps and made dolls for her boy. She had an artist's hands, but after that man abandoned her, she changed. She became quiet, sad, and one day she simply disappeared. Don Emilio also spoke with Father Agustin, who remembered baptizing Isabel as a child. She was a beautiful child, the priest said nostalgically. Intelligent, kind. But when she fell in love with that stranger, things changed. Her mother didn't approve. There were arguments, doors slammed. And when Mateo was born without them being married, the scandal was terrible. In a town like this, these things matter. And the boy's father, he left when Mateo was 2 years old. Promised to return but never did. Isabel waited for months. I saw her many times sitting in the plaza, looking at the road, waiting. And shortly after, she left too. Each testimony added a piece to the puzzle. Don Emilio began to understand that Isabel hadn't been the selfish woman Doña Carmen described. She was a woman who had suffered, who had made difficult decisions, who had been judged mercilessly by a town that didn't forgive mistakes. One afternoon, while reviewing old records at the post office, Don Emilio found something that made his heart race. It was an old envelope, returned 5 years ago for lack of an addressee, addressed to Isabel Vargas in San Rafael de las Flores. The address was incomplete, blurred, but it was a start. Someone had tried to contact her there. The next day, Don Emilio asked for time off from work. The head of the post office, a young man from the city, looked at him with disbelief. "You're going to travel 2 days to look for a woman who may not even be there. Don Emilio, with all respect, you're too old for those adventures." "I made a promise," the mailman replied firmly, "and a mailman always keeps his promises." Don Emilio returned home and prepared a small backpack. He packed Mateo's letter, some clothes, a little money, bread and cheese for the road. That night, before sleeping, he looked at Magdalena's photograph on the wall. "Magdalena," he whispered, "if you're listening from wherever you are, take care of me on this journey. I'm doing it for that boy, you would understand." The next morning, before dawn, Don Emilio took the first bus heading north. Mateo didn't know he was leaving, but Don Emilio had left him a note with the baker. "I'm going to find her. Have faith." The road to San Rafael de las Flores was long and winding. The bus climbed narrow roads that bordered vertiginous precipices. On one side rose mountains covered with pines, on the other opened the abyss, deep and dark. The bus creaked and groaned at every curve. The landscape constantly changed. First were cultivated lands, fields of golden corn swaying in the wind. Then came dense forests where the sun barely penetrated. Then arid mountains with grey rocks. And finally, they began climbing toward the highlands, where fog enveloped everything like a white mantle. Don Emilio looked out the window, holding his bag tightly, repeating silently like a prayer, "I'm going to find her. For Mateo, I'm going to find her." They stopped in several small towns. In one of them, Don Emilio bought hot tamales from a lady in the plaza. The town was sad, with unpainted houses and dirt streets. Children played barefoot and skinny dogs wandered. Don Emilio ate, thinking about Mateo, wondering if he was okay. The bus continued. They passed by a rushing river, where the driver stopped to let the engine cool. Don Emilio washed his face with the cold water. The sound of the river was comforting, a constant murmur that reminded him of nature's persistence. They arrived in San Rafael de las Flores at sunset on the second day. The town was even smaller than San Miguel, barely 20 houses scattered on a steep slope. Fog enveloped everything like a damp, cold veil. The houses were dark wood with tin roofs, and the roads were muddy earth. There was no central plaza, only a small stone chapel. The silence was profound, broken only by distant dog barking. Don Emilio got off with his legs numb and aching. The mountain cold hit him immediately. He asked the driver where to find lodging. "There's no hotel here," the driver replied, "but you can ask at the store." Don Emilio walked to a small store that sold everything. The owner was an older woman with a thick wool shawl. "Good afternoon," Don Emilio greeted. "I'm looking for lodging for one night." The woman evaluated him. "I have a room in the back, 5 pesos a night, breakfast included." "Perfect. I'm also looking for someone, a woman named Isabel Vargas." "Do you know her?" The woman frowned, thoughtful. "Isabel Vargas? I don't know anyone by that name. Maybe she lives with an aunt, a lady named Soledad." The woman's expression changed. There was a flash of recognition. Doña Soledad died 2 years ago. She was a lonely woman who lived in the last house on the road, but after her death, someone stayed in that house. A young woman. She doesn't go out much, doesn't talk to anyone. Nobody knows who she is or where she's from. Don Emilio's heart beat faster. "Where exactly is that house?" The woman pointed toward the end of the road. "Follow the road until it ends. It's the last house. But I warn you, that woman doesn't receive visitors. Several people have tried, and she's closed the door in their faces." "Thank you. I'll try." Don Emilio left his backpack and immediately left toward the end of the road. Daylight was disappearing and the fog thickened. The path was covered with wet leaves that crunched under his feet. The air smelled of pine and damp moss. As he advanced, the houses became more spaced until only forest remained. At the end of the path, almost hidden among trees, was a small wooden house with a rusty tin roof. The windows were closed with worn curtains, but a faint light shone inside. There was a neglected little garden in front with wild herbs and withered flowers. The place emanated abandonment and loneliness. Don Emilio approached and knocked softly. His hand trembled from cold, exhaustion, or emotion he didn't know. No response. He knocked again, harder, and heard movement inside. Slow, cautious steps. "Who is it?" asked a woman's voice from inside. A tired, suspicious voice tinged with fear. "I'm Don Emilio, mailman from San Miguel del Valle. I'm looking for Isabel Vargas." There was a long silence, but finally he heard the sound of a bar being removed. The door opened just a crack, and in the dimness appeared the face of a young woman. Don Emilio recognized her immediately, though 5 years had passed. She had dark hair in a careless braid, large, sad eyes, the same eyes as Mateo, and a paleness that spoke of sleepless nights. Her face was thinner, more marked, with lines of suffering. She wore a large mended sweater, and her hands trembled slightly. "Who's looking for her?" she asked, barely audibly. "Your son." The woman became completely still. Her lips trembled, and her eyes instantly filled with tears. "Mateo," she whispered, and in that word was an entire universe of love, pain, guilt, and longing. "Yes, Mateo." She covered her face with her hands and began to sob. Her body bent as if the weight of that name was too much to bear. Don Emilio then saw what the initial dimness had hidden. Isabel was very sick. Her body was too thin, almost fragile, with a paleness that spoke of long illness. "Please come in," she finally said, opening the door completely. Don Emilio entered. The interior was humble but surprisingly clean. There was a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a wood stove emanating weak heat, a shelf with books and dishes. On the walls hung children's drawings, old and faded but carefully framed. Don Emilio immediately recognized the clumsy stroke of a small child, drawings Mateo had made years ago, a house with a smiling sun, a family holding hands, a tree with birds. Isabel sat on the bed because her legs wouldn't support her. She dried her tears with her sweater sleeve and looked at Don Emilio with pleading eyes. "How is he?" How is my boy? He's fine. He lives with Doña Carmen, goes to school, eats well, but he misses you every day, Isabel. He misses you with every fiber of his being." She closed her eyes, and tears continued falling silently. I didn't want to leave him. Believe me, Don Emilio, by God I didn't want to. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. What happened, daughter? Why did you leave?" Isabel took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to tell a story she'd kept too long. 5 years ago, when Mateo was 4, I started feeling sick. At first I thought it was fatigue, sadness over his father's abandonment. But it got worse every day. I coughed blood at night, couldn't breathe well. I woke up choking. A doctor examined me and said I had tuberculosis, that I needed urgent treatment, that I had to go to a sanatorium. But we had no money, Don Emilio, nothing. And my mom blamed me for everything, said I deserved it, that it was punishment. She told me if I stayed, I would infect Mateo, that I'd kill him with my illness. She paused, sobbing. I was so afraid, Don Emilio. Afraid of making my son sick, afraid of him seeing me die slowly, afraid of being a burden. My Aunt Soledad wrote offering me her house. She said here, in the mountains, the pure air could help me recover. I thought if I left, Mateo could have a better life. I thought my mum would take good care of him. I thought it would be easier for him to grow up without a sick mother. I left one night while he slept. I kissed him on the forehead, kept his drawings, and left crying all the way. But he didn't forget you, Isabel. That boy loves you with all his heart. Isabel brought her hands to her chest, as if it physically hurt. I didn't forget him a single day either. Every morning I wake up thinking about him. Every night I fall asleep crying. I keep his drawings like treasures. Sometimes I talk to them, tell them how I feel. I've healed a little. The air here helped, but I never had the courage to return. I thought he'd hate me. I thought it would be better to remain a blurred memory than a failed mother. That boy wrote a letter for you, Isabel. Here it is. Don Emilio took the envelope from his shirt pocket and handed it to her. Isabel took it with trembling hands. She looked at it for a long moment before daring to open it. When she finally did and began to read, her face transformed. First there was pain, then surprise, then infinite tenderness. Tears fell on the paper, soaking her son's words. She read each word slowly, savoring it, as if each letter were a hug from her son. When she reached the part where Mateo said he kept her photo under his pillow, Isabel sobbed so loudly that Don Emilio had to embrace her. She clung to him like a lost child, crying years of pain, years of guilt, years of repressed love. "He remembers me," she whispered between sobs. "He still remembers me. He remembers my voice, the songs, the hugs. I thought he would have forgotten me. Children never forget their mother's daughter. Never." Isabel hugged the letter against her chest, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She rocked gently, murmuring her son's name over and over. That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. She stayed awake, reading and rereading Mateo's letter. Each word from her son was a dagger and a balm at the same time. It hurt to know how much he'd suffered, but filled her with hope to know he still loved her. Before dawn, Isabel lit a candle and took out paper and pencil. Her hands still trembled, but she had to write. She had to tell her son everything she'd kept for 5 years. She began to write with desperate urgency. "My dear Mateo, there are not enough words to tell you how sorry I am for leaving you. There is not enough forgiveness for what I did, but I need you to know the truth. I left because I was very sick and I was afraid of infecting you. I left because your grandmother told me it was best for you. I left because I thought without me you could be happier. But every day I've been away has been hell. Every day I've missed you. Every day I've cried for you. I keep every one of your drawings on my wall. I look at them every morning and every night. They're the only thing that has kept me alive these years. When I feel very bad, I look at them and remember your laughter, your hugs, your endless questions, your way of saying, 'I love you,' with that sweet voice that broke my heart with so much love. I want you to know that I also sing that song about the moon and the stars. I sing it softly, imagining you hear me from afar. I want you to know there isn't a single day when I don't think about you, when I don't regret leaving, when I don't wish to hug you one more time. Don Emilio found me. He's a good man, like an angel who came to bring me your words. And now I want to come back. I want to see you. I want to hug you. I want to ask your forgiveness on my knees. I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me, but I need to try. I'm going to come back, my love. I'm going to return to San Miguel. I'm going to return to you. Wait for me. Please, wait for me. I love you more than my own life. Never doubt it. Your mom who always loved you, Isabel. The next day, when Don Emilio arrived at Isabel's house, he found her packing her few belongings in an old suitcase. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but on her face was a determination that hadn't been there before. I'm going back with you, she said. I can't wait another day. I need to see my son. Are you sure? Are you strong enough for the trip? It doesn't matter if I'm strong or not. I'm going back even if I have to crawl. I've lost 5 years. I'm not going to lose another day. Don Emilio smiled tenderly. Then let's go. There's a bus leaving this afternoon. Isabel finished packing. She didn't have much. Some clothes, Mateo's drawings carefully rolled up, the photograph of both of them she'd saved. Before leaving, she looked at the house where she'd lived in solitude for 5 years. It was a sad house, but also the place where she'd learned that a mother's love doesn't fade with distance. They closed the door and began the journey back. Isabel walked slowly, still weak, but with each step she felt more alive. Don Emilio walked beside her, holding her small suitcase, being once again the messenger of hope. At the store, the owner wished them a good trip with a smile. They boarded the bus that would take them back through the mountains. Isabel sat by the window and looked at the landscape she was leaving behind. The misty mountains, the pine trees, the heavy silence of San Rafael. She was leaving behind her exile, her penance, her loneliness. The return trip was long, but Isabel barely noticed. She was lost in her thoughts, imagining the moment when she'd see Mateo. Would he recognize her? Would he run to her or remain still? Would he cry? Would he smile? Would he forgive her? The questions tormented her, but also filled her with an anticipation that made her feel alive. They spent the night in a small town halfway. Isabel barely slept. She stayed awake, looking out the window, seeing the stars, the same moon her son saw from San Miguel. I'm coming, my love, she whispered to the night. I'm coming. The next day, they continued. The bus descended through the mountains, leaving behind the cold and entering warmer lands. Isabel felt her heart accelerate with each kilometer. She was getting closer and closer to her son, closer to the redemption she longed for. They arrived in San Miguel del Valle at sunset on the 3rd day. The church bells were ringing, marking 6 o'clock. Don Emilio had notified Mateo through a note left with the baker. I'm returning today. Prepare for a surprise. Mateo had waited all day on the same step where he always waited. Doña Carmen had tried to get him inside, but the boy refused. He had a feeling something important was about to happen. When the bus stopped in the plaza, Mateo saw Don Emilio get off, and behind him, moving slowly with a small suitcase, he saw a woman. A thin woman with dark hair in a braid, with large eyes searching anxiously. Mateo stood up slowly. His heart began to beat so hard he could hear it in his ears. The woman saw him. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, time stopped. "Mom," whispered Mateo, though he knew the answer in his soul. Isabel dropped the suitcase. Tears ran down her face uncontrollably. "Mateo!" she shouted, and her voice broke into 1,000 pieces. The boy started running. He ran like he'd never run in his life, with his arms outstretched, with his heart overflowing with joy. Isabel also ran toward him, with strength she didn't know she had, with the love she'd kept for 5 years. They met in the middle of the plaza. Mateo threw himself into his mother's arms, and she caught him, lifted him off the ground despite her weakness, pressed him against her chest as if she'd never let go again. Both cried, laughed, hugged desperately. "Mom, Mom, Mom," Mateo repeated over and over, as if by saying her name he could keep her real. "My boy, my love, forgive me, Isabel sobbed, kissing his head, his cheeks, his hands. The townspeople began to gather around. Some cried, others smiled, others simply observed in silence that moment of pure love. Don Emilio stood aside, wiping tears with his old handkerchief. His work was done. The letter had reached its destination. Doña Carmen came out when she heard the commotion. When she saw her daughter hugging her grandson, her face went through 100 emotions. There was pain, resentment, but also something like relief. She walked slowly toward them. Isabel saw her and stood up, still holding Mateo with one arm. "Mum," Isabel said quietly, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." Doña Carmen said nothing for a long, tense moment. Then, with a deep sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, she extended her arms and hugged her daughter. She didn't say, "I forgive you." She didn't say, "I missed you," but the embrace said it all. The three embraced in the middle of the plaza, the grandmother, the mother, the boy. 3 generations united by love and pain, separated by circumstances, reunited by hope. That night Isabel slept in her old room in Doña Carmen's house. Mateo refused to separate from her for a second. He lay down beside her, with his head on his mother's chest, listening to the beating of her heart, making sure she was real. Isabel caressed him until he fell asleep, and then continued caressing him, looking at him, engraving every detail of his face in her memory. The following days were of adjustment. Isabel had to explain to Mateo about her illness, about why she'd left. The boy listened attentively, asking questions, crying sometimes, but always holding his mother's hand. Little by little he began to understand that she hadn't abandoned him for lack of love, but because of an excess of it. Doña Carmen and Isabel had long, difficult conversations. There were tears, harsh words, uncomfortable silences, but there was also forgiveness, slow and painful, but real. The old woman began to understand that she'd judged her daughter too harshly, that she too had contributed to her departure with cruel words. Isabel began to regain strength. Her son's love was the best medicine. She started helping Doña Carmen in the house, cooking, sewing. The town, which at first had received her with judgmental looks, little by little accepted her again. Teacher Rosario visited and offered her work as an assistant at the school. Father Agustin blessed her and welcomed her back to the community. Mateo changed completely. The sad boy who waited on the step became a radiant boy. He smiled all the time, talked non-stop, took his mother by the hand everywhere to introduce her to his friends. At school, his performance improved dramatically. The teacher commented that it was as if a light had been turned on inside him. One night, as they prepared for bed, Mateo brought out the stuffed bear Isabel had made him years ago, oh so worn and loved, with his ear barely attached. "I kept him, Mum, just like I kept you in my heart." Isabel held her son and the bear, and they cried together, but this time they were tears of healing. Don Emilio visited the house frequently. He had become part of the family, the honorary grandfather who had made the miracle possible. Mateo hugged him every time he saw him and told him, "Thank you, Don Emilio. Thank you for finding my mom." One afternoon, 3 months after Isabel's return, Don Emilio was finishing his delivery route when Mateo intercepted him on the street. The boy carried an envelope. "Don Emilio, I have another letter to deliver." The mailman smiled. "Who is it for this time?" "For you." Don Emilio took the envelope curiously. He opened it and found a drawing. It was an image of 3 people, a boy, a woman, and an older man with a bag on his shoulder. All 3 were smiling, holding hands. Underneath, in careful handwriting, it said, "My family, thank you for bringing my mom back. I love you, Don Emilio." The old mailman felt tears beginning to well up. He hugged the boy tightly. "Thank you, son. This is the best payment a mailman can receive." That night, Don Emilio hung the drawing on the wall of his house, next to the photographs of his own family. He sat in his chair by the window and looked at the stars. He thought about Magdalena, about his life as a mailman, about all the letters he'd delivered over the years. Some had brought good news, others bad. Some had changed lives, others had been lost to oblivion. But this one, Mateo's letter, had been the most important of all, because it wasn't just a letter. It was a bridge between 2 separated hearts. It was proof that love can survive distance, time, pain. It was confirmation that his work had meaning, that every envelope he carried in his bag contained not just paper and ink, but hopes, dreams, human connections. "I did it, Magdalena," he whispered to the night, to her memory. "I brought them back together." And somewhere in the universe, he liked to believe she smiled. proud of the man she'd loved, proud of the messenger of hope who'd never stopped believing in the power of a simple letter. Months passed and became a year. Isabel fully recovered. Her illness was left behind like a distant nightmare. She got permanent work at the school, helping teacher Rosario with the younger children. The children adored her because she read stories with funny voices and taught them to draw. Mateo grew up happy. He was no longer the lonely boy who waited on the step. He had friends, played in the plaza, laughed without reserve, but he never forgot what he'd lived through. Every night, before sleeping, he hugged his mother and told her, "Thank you for coming back. I love you so much." And he kept that promise he'd made in his heart, to always be grateful for second chances, to never take love for granted, to believe in the power of hope. One day, Mateo asked Don Emilio to take him to the post office. He wanted to learn about the mailman's work. Don Emilio, delighted, taught him how letters were organized, how addresses were read, how routes were planned. Mateo listened, fascinated, taking notes in a small notebook. "When I grow up, I want to be a mailman like you," Mateo said seriously. "I want to help families reunite. I want to carry hope like you did." Don Emilio felt a deep emotion. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You'll be an extraordinary mailman, Mateo, because you know the value of a letter, because you know that sometimes a simple envelope can change a life." The years continued their course. Don Emilio aged more, his steps slower, his hands more gnarled, but he continued delivering letters until his body could no longer do it. When he finally retired at the age of 75, the entire town organized a ceremony in his honor. They gave him a plaque that said, "To Don Emilio, the mailman who delivers more than letters, he delivers hope." Isabel and Mateo were in the front row. When it was Mateo's turn to speak, now a tall, strong teenager of 15, he approached the microphone with a letter in his hands. His voice was deeper now, but still carried that same earnestness, that same capacity for deep feeling. "Don Emilio, when I was a small boy, I gave you a letter with no addressee. You could have laughed at me. You could have thrown away that letter. You could have ignored a foolish boy with an impossible dream. But you didn't. You took that letter and moved mountains to deliver it, and in doing so, you gave me back my mother. You gave me back my family. You gave me back my life. Today, I deliver a letter to you." Mateo approached and gave the envelope to Don Emilio. The old mailman opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter written in perfect handwriting. "Dear Don Emilio, words will never be enough to thank you for what you did for me and my mom. You saved us both. You gave us a second chance. You taught us that love is stronger than any distance. When I'm older, I'm going to be a mailman. I'm going to follow your example. I'm going to deliver every letter as if it were the most important in the world, because I learned from you that they all are. Every letter carries a piece of someone's soul, a hope, a love, a goodbye, a reunion. Thank you for believing in a boy. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being the best mailman in the world. You taught me that sometimes the greatest journeys aren't measured in kilometers, but in the distance between two hearts, and that all it takes to bridge that distance is someone who believes in love, someone who refuses to give up, someone like you. With all my love and admiration, Mateo." Don Emilio couldn't contain his tears. They flowed freely down his weathered face. He hugged Mateo with all the strength he had left, and the boy, no, the young man, hugged him back just as tightly. Isabel joined the embrace, and the three remained like that, in the middle of the town's applause, united by a story that had begun with a letter without an addressee, and ended with a family reunited and a bond that would last forever. That night, Don Emilio returned to his house with his heart full of peace. He sat in his chair by the window, looked at the stars shining in the infinite sky, and smiled. He had fulfilled his mission. He had been a good mailman. He had delivered the most important letter of his life to the right heart, and in some way he couldn't explain, he felt Magdalena's presence stronger than he had in years, as if she'd been with him every step of that journey to the mountains, guiding him, giving him strength, helping him complete this one final crucial delivery. "We did it, mi amor," he whispered. "We brought them home." Years later, when Don Emilio passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, the entire town mourned. But none mourned more deeply than Mateo, now a young man of 19 who had just been accepted to the Postal Service Academy. At the funeral, Mateo placed something in Don Emilio's casket, a white envelope sealed with no address. Inside was a simple message: "Thank you for teaching me that love always finds its way home. Rest well, my friend. Your deliveries are complete." Indeed, 10 years after that, Mateo became the mailman of San Miguel del Valle, walking the same routes his mentor had walked, carrying his worn leather bag, the very same one Don Emilio had used, given to Mateo in the old man's will, and he carried with him always the lesson Don Emilio had taught him: that every letter is important, that every delivery matters, that somewhere in that envelope might be the words that change everything, that heal everything, that bring someone home. Because sometimes the distance between two hearts isn't measured in mountains or miles, but in fear and silence and time. And sometimes all it takes to close that distance is a messenger who believes in love, a white envelope, and someone brave enough to hope. If this story accompanied you today, give us a like and share this tale with someone who needs a ray of hope. Because in this world, where everything moves so fast, where messages are sent in seconds and forgotten in minutes, there is still room for letters that touch the soul, for mailmen who carry hope, and for children who patiently wait for the return of what they love. And remember, never underestimate the power of a letter written with love. Never doubt the value of a messenger who believes in his mission. And never lose hope that love, no matter how far away it is, always finds its way back home. Because in the end, we are all just looking for our way back to the hearts we belong to. And sometimes all we need is someone who believes in us enough to help us find the way.